there. Fire safety in a sustainable society is the name of this session, obviously. And what we were talking about before is summarized here on the slide. You can see the definition from the Brundtland Commission that Anne read out. A sustainable society meets our present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So clearly it doesn't mean that we need to forsake our own needs here and now in order to have a sustainable society, but we do need to think in terms of the fact that future generations also will need to be able to meet their own needs. And the second point there, in terms of the fact that we need to think holistically in order to be able to think sustainably, to think from a systemic point of view. And it's become more and more common to actually divide sustainability up into 3 dimensions. As I said, when I started in the 90s, then we typically spoke only of one of these dimensions. We spoke about the ecological dimension or environmental friendliness. But in order for something to be truly sustainable, then we need to think both in terms of economic sustainability, ecological sustainability, and also social sustainability, and how these things interact with each other in terms of fire safety is necessary. So we can't think simplistically, we need to think multidimensionally. So moving on to my specific presentation about fire safety and sustainability, are they friend or foe? Do we see them as actually reinforcing each other? Can fire safety be something that is reinforced by a sustainability way of thinking, or is it actually something that works against each other, that may be contradictory? And I hope that through the presentation that I give now, I'll be able to come to some kind of a conclusion that we can agree on whether or not. I won't tell you right now. Maybe you can guess what I hope the conclusion will be, but you'll see towards the end. But in order to start, I think we need to have a common understanding of what is the fire safety problem that we're facing here today. So, the fire problem. The World Health Organization estimates that on an annual basis, somewhere close to 180,000 people are burned in fires or due to burn deaths annually. Now, not all of those are what we would traditionally think of as fires in a Western European type of way of thinking. A lot of them have to do with cooking fires in poor countries where you have poor situations that are not similar to the situations we have here. But even from, say, a European perspective, we have an annual number of deaths of around about 3,500 people dying in fires every year, and around about 70,000 people being injured in fires. So clearly it's a problem that we need to address and that we need to find solutions for. So we can establish here that fire safety is important. In developed countries, we typically say, and I've looked for references, there are some references, but I haven't seen a lot of specific calculations about the fact that we estimate fire costs, direct fire costs, to be around about 1% of the gross domestic product in most developed countries. The NFPA has actually done some work where they've made some estimates and tried to include costs other than direct costs here, and they've come up with estimates that would be close to double that, so approaching 2% of the gross domestic product if you try to include some of the indirect costs of fires. And really, we don't know. I mean, there's more work that needs to be done in trying to understand where do we draw the boundaries of what are the direct and indirect costs of fires. So they could potentially be even higher. Insurance company statistics are also a wealth of data in terms of what are the cost of fires. And recently, Swiss Re released, which is a reinsurance company, released data about the cost of the wildland fires that occurred in the US in 2017. And they found that the costs there were in excess of $14 billion. So we're seeing huge costs associated with wildland fires in recent years. Now, 2018, the fire issues that we saw not only in Sweden, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but also in the US, were even greater. And I've seen numbers recently when I was in the US last week where they're estimating the cost of wildland fires in the US for 2018 to be close to $16.5 billion. Huge, difficult to understand that scale of cost. Insurance statistics also show that in the built environment, so not just the wildland environment, then a large portion of the costs in terms of annual business and interruptions globally come from fires. So this is not an economically sustainable picture, I think we can agree, at the very least. But the situation that we have in the future is likely to change. One of the questions that came to the speakers just before this breakout session was whether can we predict what the future will look like? I think when Kathleen and Anders were talking about the situation today and in the future. And I think that we can certainly agree that the future is going to be different to the situation that we have today. And some information that we have here on the slides. I don't think there's a pointer here, is there? No. In here. But the picture that we have here at the top of the screen shows United Nations population growth statistics, where we can see that according to some estimates, we may actually see a plateau or a maximum in the global population somewhere around about 2050 or 2100, but we still have an increasing population at the moment. The picture below shows what we would expect to have in terms of the demographics, so the age distribution for the population. These are actually statistics for 2017, so what the actual population age distribution was on this side, and then for 1950. And we see that we're moving towards an aging society, and the picture is likely to increase in this vein, so that we're going to get perhaps something that approaches even a kite type of distribution, where you would have a top-heavy distribution towards the older ages. And this is going to create a whole lot of sustainability-related issues. Also associated with the increase in population, we see an increase in urbanization. Urbanization is something that I think many people think that there was a peak in perhaps some years ago, but in fact we see continued increase in urbanization. Large cities are becoming larger, and there are increases in the number of cities with populations over 1 million in the world at the moment still. Now, in developed countries, this can mean things like you have crowding, we can have increases in high-rise buildings and so on, whereas in undeveloped countries, we're seeing an increase in things like informal settlements and the fire safety implications of that. But in general, we can say with the increasing population, with the changing demographics, and with the continued urbanization, then we have great fire safety challenges that also relate to sustainability. So for the rest of this presentation, which is only about 5 minutes left, then I'm going to talk about fire safety and sustainability in 3 main categories. One of which relates to climate change, the next related to resiliency and the need for increased resiliency in society, and the final one related to fire safety associated with new materials, products and services. Because I think these are the 3 key areas where fire safety basically comes into contact with sustainability. So in terms of climate change and resiliency, climate change is not only about global warming. Climate change, as we're seeing globally at the moment, is to a large degree about the fact that we're having increased weather volatility. So in some areas of the world, we will see increased temperatures, which is going to lead to things like increased forest fires. In other parts of the world, we may actually see decreases in temperature or increases in storms. So the way that climate change is expressed in different climates is going to be, or in different countries, is going to be different. And we need to be able to learn to deal with the increased number of potential natural hazards that we will be exposed to. And this relates very closely to resiliency. How well equipped are we as a society, as a response organization, to be able to respond to large natural disasters? We had a speech just before the break here about the forest fires in Sweden and the fact that we had unprecedented numbers of forest fires in Sweden, which create or place a huge strain on the response organization. If we were to, for example, have not only fires occurring, but also large flooding occurring, because we have multiple storms occurring at the same time that we've had essentially hot weather, then this could place additional strain on resources that are already under stress. And trying to understand and predict what kinds of problems would be associated with that is something that's very important for us to be able to ensure that we have a resilient society for the future. MSB has actually just recently awarded a project to Lund University where we will be looking into the question of both crowding of natural disasters, where we would have different types of disasters occurring close to each other, either in time or in space, but are otherwise unrelated, or cascading of natural disasters, where you have one disaster leading to another, for example, causing additional stress on society. So for improved resiliency, we need to be able to have improved pre-incident planning, improved incident response, and also improved post-incident performance in order to ensure that we have the best possible situation to deal with our changing world. In terms of new materials, products and services, I think that there are three main aspects that we need to be looking at in order to consider fire safety. And this is both the need for new robust models in order to be able to quantify and understand how the three dimensions of sustainability, both ecological, economic and social, how they are affected by the fire safety considerations that we make. We need to have better data in order to be able to input to models, but also in order to be able to understand the fire safety situation. And we need to have better models in order to be able to understand firefighting choices that we make, so tactics in response to actual incidents, how they impact on the environment or how they impact on the different dimensions of sustainability. In terms of that first point, there's been some work done over the years to develop some models, one of which is called the Fire Life Cycle Assessment Model, which tries to incorporate the fact that fires can take place as part of a potential product life cycle outcome in order to be able to understand what are the environmental implications of fire safety considerations, or what are the fire safety considerations, implications of environmental considerations. In the same way, we developed and worked on a cost-benefit type of model, which tried to apply the same kind of thinking, but instead of looking at ecological dimensions or impacts of fire safety, to actually try and get a handle on what are the cost implications of fire safety. These types of models need to be worked on more and applied to new kinds of situations or products, but also we need to extend them to include things like what are the social impacts of fire safety in order to truly be looking at all of the dimensions of sustainability. In terms of data, at the moment we've just recently started a project working together with the National Research, the Research Foundation as part of the NFPA, has funded to develop a research roadmap looking at what is the environmental impact of fires, not just the direct environmental impact, but also the indirect environmental impact, with a particular focus on looking at economic models of trying to understand what the costs are of fires. And here we're going to be trying to identify what are the gaps in information that we need to have more research in order to fill. And on the third point, with firefighting and understanding what is the impact of different firefighting tactical choices on the environment, there's also another project which is ongoing at the moment as a collaboration between Lund University, Rice, and a consulting agency or consultancy called Brandforsk, looking at trying to measure the environmental impact, or the impact of fire on the environment. The project is actually producing a tool called the Fire Impact Tool, which brings together both an environmental impact or an environmental risk assessment aspect and a life cycle assessment aspect. And the project leader is here at the moment. Francine, you could wave. And she will be available to demonstrate the tool and what it can do in terms of helping fire services make decisions about tactical choices and what their impact is on fires for the future in the Brandforsk exhibit. And this project is funded by Brandforsk and by the NFPA. So we thank you for that. So finally, just summing up, fire safety and sustainability, are they friend or foe? And I think my answer would certainly be that they need to be seen as friends. They're something that can reinforce each other. Consider the cost of not considering fire safety. If we don't consider fire safety, then the cost to the environment, the cost economically, and the social costs of being involved in a fire, losing your home, losing access to an environment is unthinkable. So they need to be seen as being friends. We need a multidisciplinary approach in order to be able to attack these issues because of the complexity of trying to understand how does fire safety impact on economics, on the environment, or on social settings. And I think that fire safety can actually be an enabler. We can use fire safety to leverage different types of innovations and leverage a multifaceted approach in order to be able to provide fire safety in a sustainable world. Thank you.